Which of the Eagles and 49ers wide receivers will have a big game in their potential shootout week 13? And what do you do with the Texans and Rams? It's time to break down our wide receiver and tight end rankings for week 13 as we begin another edition of Locked On Fantasy Football.
You are Locked On Fantasy, your daily NFL fantasy podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Greetings, everyone, and welcome to another edition of the Locked On Fantasy Football Podcast. We're your destination to become the smartest fantasy football player in the league. We're part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day, your fantasy football team every day as well. I'm one of your co-hosts, Vinnie and Iyer. And when I'm not doing this, I'm writing about NFL, fantasy, and betting for sportingnews.com.
Hey, I'm Michelle Magdziuk, researcher at NFL Network and fantasy analyst for NFL.com.
All right, Michelle, it is my favorite time of the week because we get into these wide receiver and tight end matchups and the rankings there, guys we like, guys we don't like. Let's start this show on a positive note here. We'll look at the Eagles and 49ers. Before we do that, we will have our price picks of the week there for you on Friday. This is a crossover Thursday all across the network, breaking down these games, including Eagles 49ers. It's brought to you by Price Picks, the easiest, most exciting way to play daily fantasy sports. Go to prizepicks.com/LockedNFL. Use the code, all lowercase LockedNFL, for a first deposit match up to $100. And if you're playing Price Picks, you probably want to be attached a lot to this Philadelphia-San Francisco game. A lot of good matchups across the board. Let's start there, Michelle, and look at the Eagles here. A.J. Brown has kind of had his wheel greased or something like that, and they've pivoted back to DeVonta Smith to make some big plays here. So 49ers, what do you think here? Is it a Brown game? Is it a Smith game? Can both go off in this matchup?
Yeah, I'm a little worried about A.J. Brown because the last 2 weeks, like after the bye, have not been good for Brown. Now, he got the touchdown last week. It saved his fantasy day a bit, but still not producing like we're used to A.J. Brown producing, right? 8 receiving yards in week 11, 37 last week. And the thing is, Charvarius Ward, who will likely be on A.J. Brown for a lot of this game, he shut down DK Metcalf last week. Now, I do think A.J. Brown's a better overall wide receiver than Metcalf, but they're close type of players, right? I think maybe DeVonta Smith continues to get the targets, maybe has a better game. Both were held in check against in the NFC Championship game, though. Neither one had more than 40 receiving yards in that game.
Yeah, I mean, you look at this matchup, what's happening here, and this is a little bit of an underrated story. I mean, Olamide Zaccheaus, when he has to score and he's your third option in the passing game, you know, you got some problems, right? So what are they going to do if there's no Dallas Goedert in the middle of the field? They're going to put their attention on making sure A.J. Brown doesn't have a home run play, right? That's what I would do. And this is a zone defense with the 49ers, and they're going to try to get some safety help over the top. They don't have Talanoa Hufanga anymore, so they need to be a little bit careful on the back end, not give up too many big plays there. So A.J. Brown can still get his, but I think he might be end zone dependent again this week. I think what's great about DeVonta Smith is they can move him around. I mean, they've had up and downs, right? Ambry Thomas, Isaiah Oliver, some of these other guys have been up and down. But what's happening really, as we thought about it here with Dallas Goedert out of the mix, it's really helped DeVonta. That's why we were banging the table, trade for DeVonta. This is going to be his time here. So I think he has a bigger game. A.J. Brown potentially can blow up with touchdowns, though. That's why I have him a little bit higher, where I think he's a guy we look in the red zone. But it's just hard for me to drop A.J. Brown too far in the rankings. But I think both these guys are fine plays, but do not be surprised in terms of the yardage and targets. DeVonta has a bigger day.
Yeah, I agree with you there. And then on the other side of the ball for the 49ers, now the Eagles, on the other hand, are really, really bad against wide receivers, right? Giving up by far the most fantasy points to the position this year. But I think Brandon Aiyuk, this is a Brandon Aiyuk game. Like Deebo could have a good game as well. But I think Brandon Aiyuk goes absolutely off in this game. I have him ranked as a top 5 guy this week. You have him ranked very highly as well at wide receiver 8. But we haven't seen Aiyuk be consistent, right? 2 weeks ago, he was the wide receiver 4, but then goes back down to the wide receiver 28. A lot of those mediocre weeks so far this year, but I'm feeling really good about him in this matchup.
Yeah, now you feel really great about his floor too, because it looked like nothing was going to happen, and then boom, touchdown from Brock Purdy late in the game when they were trying to run off the clock. I guess Brock Purdy saw him break open there, threw a beautiful ball to Brandon Aiyuk. They have really good chemistry, I'll say that. And Deebo Samuel's coming on. I mean, the Eagles play a little bit of a zone defense. I think it actually helps both of these guys. Deebo over the middle of the field. George Kittle, the Eagles have actually gotten a little bit better against the tight end, so that'll be interesting to see. And again, we've had a couple games where all three guys have come through. Maybe you might need a Deebo rushing touchdown to have that happen here in this game. But I love Aiyuk this week. I mean, I love him every week. I mean, he's just kind of matchup proof at this point. He just needs Brock Purdy to get him the ball, and that's it. And then he's good. Deebo, the usage, right, is all over the place a little bit with the backfield. Is he going to help Christian McCaffrey? Is he going to help here in the passing game? So I do like Deebo as well. I mean, the matchup is so good inside as well. Here, they're terrible in the slot. So everything lines up well. So just enjoy, and hopefully all four receivers go off in this game.
Yeah, I hope it's a high scoring game. And
Yeah.
let's have some nice weather, please. I don't want this to
Weather,
be
yes.
a rainy game. Talking about moving on to another game that should be high scoring. We would not have thought this to start the year, but Texans versus the Broncos. This should be a really fun game. On the Broncos side of the ball, start Cortland Sutton. Like, dude catches a touchdown pretty much every week. That's the only wide receiver I'm interested in playing for the Broncos side. But then moving out over to the Texans side, that gets a bit more interesting. Now, Tank Dell missed practice yesterday with a calf injury. It does seem like he's going to be okay and play, and I'm playing Tank Dell if he's active. Like, that's just happening. He's consistently a top 20 wide receiver, and we know that he has the upside to be a top 3, top 1 wide receiver on the week because we've seen it twice now in the last 4 weeks. Nico Collins always has high upside, but what if Noah Brown comes back? Do you feel as confident with starting Nico Collins?
Nico Collins is a borderline play for me this week, and part of it is I don't like his matchup against Pat Surtain too. He's going to see him the most in this game.
Yeah.
I love the inside matchups, right? For CJ Stroud, that's where he can beat the Broncos for the most part. Surtain has played really well of late. Their whole defense has started to come on, so it's not like the easiest cakewalk here for CJ Stroud anymore, right? He's going to have to be precise with his passes. He's going to have to get in the middle of the field. So I don't really like, especially Brown plays. I mean, maybe one of them gets the matchup, but they actually have two pretty good outside corners here. So the middle of the field, I think, is going to be really, quite honestly, I think open for both quarterbacks. They have to really exploit this. So if you're desperate this week, Michelle, I know it's a name people don't like to hear. If you're desperate, and that's what you have to be to play this guy, is Jerry Jeudy. I think there's going to be some things in the middle field. You can't trust him too much, but they don't really involve Adam Troutman, right? Too much at tight end. So really, if they're going to throw some inside targets, they're going to have to go to Jeudy. So I don't love him. He's a low upside play, but if you're hurting for wide receiver 3, and you might be, given the bye weeks, Jerry Jeudy's a guy that I would take a shot on again. Collins, again, if you had, say, a Collins over Jeudy, you play him, but I'm just a little bit worried about Collins. I love Tank Dell, however, to come through again this week, big time. And let's just hope that he stays involved in the second half. I know he got hurt in last week's game, but if they keep him involved for 4 quarters, I think Dell can have a big game while you fade Collins.
Yeah. I'm still okay playing Collins. You know the upside he has. With Noah Brown, it is a little bit riskier, but totally with you with Tank Dell there. Now, what about your boy Calvin Ridley? So he has had a nice couple weeks because Trevor Lawrence has got it going a little bit. The passing game looks better. It's a nice matchup, right? Against the Bengals. Not like the nicest matchup for fantasy wide receivers, but they are allowing a ton, like the most yards per reception in the league this year. So he can get those big chunk plays. I'm cool playing him again this week. I have him ranked pretty high, actually higher than you. Wide receiver 12 compared to your wide receiver 15. But I think you just keep rolling with them until, they have to face the Browns and the Ravens the next 2 weeks after that.
Yeah, I think right now Calvin Ridley's locked into his role, right? I mean, I think he was miscast a little bit playing on the wrong side of the outside with no Zay Jones, because really we know that Jamal Agnew is not a very good player. So he pretty much eliminates a threat there for Trevor Lawrence. So they just need a decent guy to draw some coverage attention away, and then you can put Calvin Ridley on the right side of the field. And Christian Kirk has been consistently there. That's an interesting story as well. Like, as Ridley's come on, Christian Kirk, I mean, it's kind of what happens, right? We can't always satisfy all the receivers. And we talk about with Brown and Smith, Deebo and Aiyuk. I mean, it's going to happen, or Dell and Collins. So you can't always butter up the right guy, right? It really comes down to the matchup, zone versus man. who's better, the slot corner? Is it the outside guy? So all these things you have to weigh in now more than ever. And I'm really glad that we're looking at that, right? We really get an idea of that because we were just, okay, this receiver's good and we play him, but now we get a little in depth here. So I like it. Calvin Ridley, I think, keeps it going this week, especially because, look, I think the Bengals defense is falling apart because their offense is not very good. So that
Yeah.
really helps Ridley as well. And now this is a tougher decision, Michelle. You mentioned the Browns matchup around the corner for Ridley. Oh, man. Puka Nacua, I really like playing him for the most part every week. I've said it and forget it pretty much since week 2 there. But now I'm starting to worry a little bit. And Matthew Stafford, I mean, stop throwing to Tyler Higbee. Stop getting just random passes to Tutu Atwell. No, we want this offense to go through two guys. And I just wish they would also shut down Cooper Kupp, right? I'm sorry to tell you, but he does not look right. He just looks off. I think he's just out there trying to grind and help his team. I get it. They're back in the wild card chase, but he looks off, Michelle. There's just something slower about him. I mean, those injuries were going to catch up to him at some point. That's why I didn't love him in fantasy this year. But I just wish they would take him off the field if he's not healthy, funnel the targets to Puka, then we'd at least have one. Because right now, their coexistence is killing each other.
Yeah, I mean, Cooper Kupp has been unplayable. The last 5 weeks, he hasn't even finished inside the top 40 wide receivers. Last 2 weeks, wide receiver 87, 82. And then Puka Nacua did nothing last week at wide receiver 70. Well, Matthew Stafford threw 4 touchdowns, right? They put up 37 points, the Rams did. And these two did absolutely nothing for fantasy. Puka's had a lot of bad games as of late. Just looking at the last 6 games, wide receiver 59, wide receiver 5, 64, 53, 12, 70. Yeah. So a lot of really just useless weeks. If I had to play one of these guys, it's Puka over Cooper, but I really am not excited about starting either against the Browns, who are the toughest defense against fantasy wide receivers this season.
Yeah, I'm going to hope for Puka. I mean, I'm hurting. Chris Olave as a concussion. I've got my other wide receiver as a concussion. These guys have been pretty solid for me, and Demario Douglas. So, I might be scrounging for random wide receivers to play this week, Michelle. That's never a good sign when your team is trying to build its playoff position here in fantasy. Well, we will help you with some other tougher wide receiver decisions there in the middle tier. I mean, we're going to have to monitor the injuries as well. But before we do that, we need to hear from one of our fine sponsors. Now, if you want to have a lot of fun playing daily fantasy sports, then Prize Picks is for you. It's the most fun I've had for sure because you can win a lot of money and it's a lot of fun because you can just get your multipliers on here. You just pick 2 to 6 players, and based on the Prize Picks projection, you just pick more or less. That's all you have to do. And then as you go along, you can win up to 25 times your money. That's why it's fun to play. And that's great. The more players you choose and you hit on, the better you can cash in here on Prize Picks. So it's awesome there as well. You can check in with Prize Picks, and you also don't have to worry if a player gets injured there that you are okay. You can get a rebooted lineup there for the next week, and you're good to go. And it's a lot of fun because you get so many ways to play here, and you can also cross over sports. You can look at NFL and NBA and do that together. So as the NFL season down the stretch, for the NBA just getting warmed up here with the in-season tournament about wrapping up. Prize Picks, really simple to play. You can make your picks and submit your entry in less than 60 seconds. Quick withdrawals, easy gameplay, enormous selection of players and stat types are what make Prize Picks the #1 daily fantasy sports app. Check it out. Go to prizepicks.com/LockedOnNFL and use the promo code LockedOnNFL for first deposit match up to $100. Again, it's prizepicks.com/LockedOnNFL and use the code LockedOnNFL for first deposit match up to $100. That's Prize Picks daily fantasy made easy. All right, Michelle, it is time to continue the show here and look at our next tier of wide receivers. Before we do that, I just have to provide y'all with a nice programming reminder. Locked On has launched the first ever national sports 24/7 streaming channel on YouTube. Locked On Sports Today is here for you 24/7, covering the top sports stories of the day with local experts of Locked On, plus our national shows covering every league. Go to Locked On Sports Today on YouTube and subscribe to the first ever national sports 24/7 streaming channel. All right, Michelle, let's look at these wide receivers in the next tier that we're going to look at. Jamar Chase, I had him really high last week, and he did get a lot of targets, and he had a decent game considering the Bengals didn't do much offensively at all. In relation to them, he was good, but it's the Jaguars this week. Are you feeling okay with Jamar Chase? I know okay is a relative term, right? Where do you think he's going to land here in the rankings, and where do you have him this week?
Yeah, I'm not thrilled about him, right? I'm still playing him, but I think he's going to be a low end wide receiver too, maybe even worse. I mean, 4 receptions for 81 yards last week, and 31 of those yards came off a crazy tip pass where the defense is going for the interception, and he ended up catching it and running away because the defense wasn't ready for him to catch it, right? And he got 31 yards on that. And besides that, he did nothing the rest of the game. I'm not thrilled about playing Jamar Chase this week, but you gotta just keep plugging him in. I'd rather go with him than Cooper Kupp, right? Or Puka Nakua. I'd rather stick with Jamar Chase there. But what about in that same game last week? We had Deontay Johnson create some drama because Jalen Warren fumbled and he didn't try to, recover the fumble or tackle the guy who got the ball. But I'm not worried about it. I think he owned up to his mistake. Mike Tomlin's not really a dude to like punish his players like that. I don't think he's going to be benched at all. And he's still getting targets. He should have had that long touchdown last week. I'm still happy playing Deontay Johnson this week. I am at wide receiver 21. You have him at wide receiver 34. It's a nice matchup against the Cardinals.
Yeah, I just don't know how much they're going to throw to him. I just feel like we know who the guy is right now, right? For Kenny Pickett in this new version of the offense is Pat Freiermuth in the middle of the field. He's
He had
trusted. He
8
gets
targets last week.
I know he has the targets, but I think it's actually going to annoy some people, right? I mean, you finally moved on from the offensive coordinator, and you're doing this right in the effort, and like everyone else, I think was on board, and then Deontay was a little bit pouty about it, right? So, I think, look, it's not purgatory. They're not going to say you're not getting the ball this week, but I also see it as an opportunity, right? If the running game gets going, what's going to happen? Big play action downfield. So George Pickens on the outside, you can burn the Cardinals with some speed receivers, and we know who Kenny Pickett's real boys are, right? It's Freiermuth and Pickens. Pickett to Pickens has to warm up at some point, right? That's the next stage of this new
Listen,
offense.
Pickett doesn't even look Pickens' way when Deontay Johnson's on the
Well,
field. And who did the long pass go to? 2 long passes, actually. One was complete, the 39-yard catch down the field. The long play action pass went to Deontay Johnson. And then the long touchdown went to Deontay Johnson, which was a catch, but we know refs don't know how to do their jobs.
Yeah, again, I'm never excited about playing Deontay Johnson. I mean, I'll play him. He's kind of like the Terry McLaurin of the Steelers a little bit. Like you'll play him and it's like, oh, okay, can we scratch out 6 for 70? Okay, this is great. But like I just think Pickens has way more upside this week. And I think Pickens is going to score a long one. I'm just going to call it right now. It's the next stage. Again, when the running game is this good, and when the concern about Freiermuth is there in the middle of the field, that's going to open things up downfield, right? I mean, that's what's going to happen. So I don't know if they'll need Johnson also too much in this game. So that's that. So I think we've seen Pickens doesn't need a lot of targets, right? If he gets one, he's good to go. They could also just totally run over this team. I think this is a bad defensive matchup for the Cardinals, so they might be passing too much volume, but I think this is why, like Kenny Pickett this week, I think he can get a couple touchdowns, but I don't think it'll be Johnson. So we'll see how that one plays out. An interesting side note there on this week's Steelers game. I expect them to win. And let's go to a different game and move on. And maybe we'll agree on both of these rookie receivers, and they're both playing the same game. Both have really good matchups. Jaden Reed against the Chiefs, and it's not bad in the middle of the field. They're kind of tougher on the outside there with Trent McDuffie, L'Jarius Sneed, and Rashee Rice has a great matchup this week. He also avoids the tough corners. Probably getting Keyshawn Nixon. He's a Pro Bowler, but more in the return game than anything else.
Yeah, I actually don't love either of these guys this week. I think this is going to be a super low scoring game. I know Rashee Rice went off for last week and got those targets, but those targets haven't consistently come. And I think both of these guys are super talented. And if they get into the end zone, we'll be fine, right? Especially with Jaden Reed, because he's not getting enough targets to not get into the end zone. He has to get into the end zone. I just really envision this game being super low scoring. I'm okay playing them, but I do not expect really great things from them. I would say there's another rookie I'd rather play over both these guys this week, and he hasn't done anything this year. It's Jonathan Mingo, but he gets the Buccaneers, right? He led the team last week. It was just 60 receiving yards. I'm not saying it was anything great, but he's had at least 6 targets in each of the last 3 weeks. He's always on the field, 90+% of snaps, which is way more than we're seeing out of Rashee Rice or Jaden Reed. And then we also now have new coaches, new play caller. We see this all the time when these teams get their new coaches. They like randomly perform great, right? That very next week, the Buccaneers have allowed the 4th most fantasy points per game to wide receivers over the last 5 weeks. I just really like this matchup for Mingo, and I think he will be more heavily involved with the new coaches moving forward.
Okay, so we got to write all this down, Michelle. We had Pickett over Goff is something that I was looking at yesterday. We got to write Pickens over Johnson, and now we have to do Reed versus Rice versus Mingo. So I'm intrigued by all these. Like, they're fun. It's just amazing to me, Michelle, just talking about this, how many rookie wide receivers have been relevant this year. It seems like there's a ton. And we talked about Puka Nacua earlier, and just Tank Dell has just been awesome. So it's great. I mean, usually it takes a year or two for these guys to get going, but I'm going to go Rice over Mingo. I mean, the quarterback,
Yeah.
although there might be a reason to go that way. Reed, I could see Reed having a quiet or game right in the front end with Jordan Love. I think you can say Bryce Young could up his game a little bit while you could fade Jordan Love. So I could see Mingo doing that. So we'll say Rice versus Mingo and see how that plays out this week. And finally, at wide receiver, these are 2 guys that play in the NFC South. Chris Godwin, I don't know. He's just miscast in this offense. He's not meant to be an outside receiver, and he's not meant to not play with Tom Brady or James Winston, apparently. So he just doesn't do much, right? Just talk about a guy that's boring to play and that you put out there. Oh, please get in the end zone. I don't want to see the 5 for 47 or whatever you're going to put up here. Because we know where Baker Mayfield's going. It's like Mike Evans. Okay, Mike Evans is not open downfield. Where's K. Dotton or Rashad White? He doesn't really look that direction. I mean, he gives Trey Palmer some high leverage looks, right, in relation to Chris Godwin. So not feeling Chris Godwin at all. And this matchup is pretty tough. And we look at it, the Panthers secondary is underrated, even with all their injuries. So I do not like him at all. Drake London, I hate his matchup this week. You have Sauce Gardner, DJ Reed. It doesn't matter who's on him. I also know Desmond Ridder stinks on the road. So, yeah, I'm fading this guy and Kyle Pitts, by the way. No more Kyle Pitts this week.
I don't want to start Chris Godwin or Drake London. Like, really, really don't want to start. I want to find anyone else with more upside. We know neither of these guys really have upside at all this year. Sorry about my alarm there. But like Drake London, he had a good game last week, 91 yards, still finishes just the wide receiver 30. Like, that's pretty much his upside this season because he's finished inside the top 20 one single week this entire year. It's just not enough upside to risk playing him in this super tough matchup. And Chris Godwin's just doing absolutely nothing, sitting both of these guys. And I know you said you're finally giving up on Kyle Pitts, but we will hit on him in our tight end section. I won't let you get away without talking some crap about Kyle Pitts here. But first, let's hear about another 2 of our sponsors. This episode of Locked On Fantasy Football is brought to you from DoorDash. Why root for your team on an empty stomach? Order on DoorDash and save on football watch party favorites. Order pizza, wings, soda, burgers, or even just buns on DoorDash and get it all delivered without missing the game. Get up to 50% off, up to a $10 value when you spend $15 or more on your first order when you download the DoorDash app and enter code LOCKED21. DoorDash offers everything from restaurant delivery, grocery delivery, flower delivery, and more. They have you covered. Don't forget to use code LOCKED23 for 50% off, up to a $10 value on your first order when you download the DoorDash app and spend $15 or more. Again, that's LOCKED23. This is subject to change and terms do apply. This episode is also brought to you from FanDuel. Snap into action this NFL season with FanDuel, America's #1 sports book. Right now, new customers get $150 in bonus bets with any $5 moneyline bet. That's $150 if your team wins. That means if you place a $5 bet on the Cowboys to beat the Seahawks tonight, and if they win, you get $150 in bonus bets. If you've been thinking about joining FanDuel, there's no better time to get in on the action. This app is easy to use. There's a wide range of betting options, including spreads, player props, over-unders, and more. To get in on the action, all you got to do is sign up by visiting fanduel.com/lockedon and enjoy the NFL season. Again, that's fanduel.com/lockedon. FanDuel, official partner of the NFL. Let's hop in to the top of our tight end rankings here. Obviously, Travis Kelce sitting right at the top. That's where he belongs always. George Kittle, we both have him as tight end 2. You never know what his usage is going to be, but he has a super high ceiling and this game should be high scoring. So I'm fine with him there. After that, I really, really love Dalton Schultz this week. I have him at tight end 3. You have him at tight end 6. So you're a little tiny bit lower, but amazing matchup against the Broncos. And I'm not scared off of his, he just ghosted last week. I'm not scared that's going to happen again in this matchup.
No, I mean, this is the number one matchup. You always look for that. And I'll say after the running back points allowed in terms of the rushing yards and receiving yards, the last thing that you would think is as reliable as the tight end charts. But they are pretty reliable this part of the season because, again, teams don't change what they do. They're going to be okay allowing things in the middle of the field. Look, they have Justin Simmons back there, and he's a very good player, but he's not really an ace coverage guy. So that's going to open things up here for Dalton Schultz. As we mentioned, again, it just sometimes becomes a funnel or becomes natural here, right? And that's where the Broncos defense is kind of the weakest at linebacker and safety coverage. So it has just kind of happened that tight end, they're the team we want to attack. And we saw David Njoku was a little slow going, but he came through in a tough spot. So look, this is the easiest matchup that you can look at. So Dalton Schultz is due. This is a fade Nico Collins, bump up Dalton Schultz type game, I think.
Yeah. And now you have David Njoku a bit higher than I do. You have him at tight end 4. I have him at tight end 10. It's not because I necessarily don't like him this week. Like, I think he's a fine play. I am a bit worried about the quarterback situation because we know Dorian Thompson-Robinson was looking his way nonstop, right? And even PJ Walker's fine for him. But Joe Flacco, I don't know. Who will he target? Now, with Amari Cooper dealing with an injury, there's not really much left, but we just don't know what this offense is going to look like if it's Joe Flacco under center.
Yeah, I actually think this is good for David Njoku if Joe Flacco plays, because if you go back, I'm going to take you a little bit back, Michelle, to a name that I had in fantasy in my lineups. Dennis Pitta. I remember this guy, and Joe Flacco loved throwing to this guy in the middle of the field. And we saw that a little bit, right, when he was playing with the Broncos or the Jets and he had to make some starts. He was thrown to the tight end quite a bit. So, look, they also know who their best receiver is, and Amari Cooper is a little bit banged up. And you look at this situation, the Rams are not bad at corner, but they're pretty bad against the tight end. That's been pretty consistent as well this season as a number you look at beyond the Broncos. So, yeah, David Njoku has just been locked in. He's playing really well. Doesn't matter who the quarterback is of late. So I like him. He's solid. It's a bad bye week, right? And Mark Andrews is hurt, and his team was not playing anyway. There's no Dalton Kincaid. There's no TJ Hawkinson. So some of these guys become a lot more attractive plays when that happens.
Yeah, and hopefully you're able to grab Pat Freiermuth either before last week or after this week if he was on waivers and you need to start someone, because I think he continues his success, right? I have him as tight end 4 this week. You have him at tight end 8. He had a career game last week with over 100. He had 120 yards, 9 receptions. And I love the matchup for him against the Cardinals. They started strong against tight ends, but over the last 5 weeks, they've allowed Higbee, Mark Andrews, David Njoku, and Dalton Schultz all to score 11 plus points against them. So like they've really gotten weaker at covering that position. And it was just so promising to see the new play caller for the Steelers utilize the middle of the field, something that Matt Canada refused to do. Shocker. They did it. It worked. Pat Freiermuth was great. And I'm happy to start Freiermuth.
Yeah, and this could be a different type of game, Michelle. This is what I'm predicting out of him this week. I think it's going to be like more 5 for 60, but he gets a touchdown. So it'll be a little bit different the way he gets the points. But yeah, the touchdown is going to come this week for sure. I mean, they're kind of warming it up a little bit with him. And that was maybe also part of this offense struggle. I know it was the play calling for sure, but not having him on the field. I mean, we saw what a big difference he can make because he can open things up. You get that really legitimate third target on the field. So I love it this week, and he could definitely score once. We'll see if he can score twice like Tyler Higbee. Now, Taysom Hill, essentially, look, he's a running back. that does a little bit of tight ending and a little bit of wide receivering and a little bit of quarterbacking. So he's kind of an outlier, but you still play him, right? At this stage, especially the state of the Saints wide receiver core. Chris Olave is in concussion protocol. Michael Thomas is on IR. You've got Rashid Shaheed battling an injury. So they're going to have to use these guys quite a bit overall. And also on top of that, Jamal Williams, he's terrible. Like, he has 0 touchdowns. He had all those touchdowns last year. He gets hurt, goes to New Orleans. He can't score. And Jameer Gibbs and David Montgomery are scoring in bunches in his place. So product of the Lions system, he's terrible. So you're going to have to get Juwan Johnson, who's a bit of a hybrid himself as a wide receiver involved, and Taysom Hill out of the backfield. So I think it lines up really well for these guys, especially against the Lions defense that hasn't looked all that great in recent weeks.
Yeah, Taysom Hill just is in your lineup. He's been a top 10 tight end in 5 of the last 6 weeks. The Saints offense are just better when he's on the field instead of Derek Carr. Like, they should probably just go to him because it's better for them. So you start Taysom Hill for sure. And I do think Juwan Johnson is a really solid start this week. Like you mentioned, all those wide receivers having injuries. He had a season high 7 targets last week because of those injuries. Turned into 4 receptions, 45 yards. Not anything amazing, but doable, right? And I think he sees at least 7, 8, maybe even 9 targets in this game. So I think he's a really solid play in a favorable matchup against the Lions defense. And then last up here with tight ends, I have to ask you a question. So if you're struggling to find a tight end this week, Juwan Johnson's not there, Pat Freiermuth's not there, you don't have any of the top guys. Is Tyler Conklin do better play this week than Kyle Pitts in the same exact game? And how did we get here, if so?
Yeah, Michelle, this might be a first, but we have Kyle Pitts ranked in the exact same spot. It's a borderline, and he's only 14 because, again,
yeah,
a
he
lot
should
of
be like
teams are
20,
off.
but there's no other tight end.
He would be 20, right? Because he would be 6 spots down with all those. Even Daniel Bellinger. Okay, maybe not Daniel Bellinger would be in this mix ahead of him, but okay, Kyle Pitts, he's just not. This is just terrible, and I think it's not, again, his fault. Like, let's get in like JJ McCarthy or someone in there next year, throwing to Kyle Pitts. Oh yeah, he has a good quarterback, and he's going to throw to the tight end also. And so, look, and I do not like Desmond Ridder. I've mentioned it. Desmond Ridder is way better at home for some reason. They're just better in Atlanta offensively. Then they go on the road. They forget how to play, and Arthur Smith kind of loses it. So, look, Tyler Conklin, the hope for him is what happened last week. Alan Lazard, they were like, no, we're not playing Alan Lazard anymore. This guy's doing nothing. He's just out there running routes. I mean, he has been the consistent guy behind Garrett Wilson, even though it hasn't added up to much. But Tim Boyle at least might figure that out a little bit. And you can throw to the tight end on the Falcons. You talked about the Saints combo. Those guys had a pretty good game there against the Falcons last week. So that is a weak spot. Their corners are pretty good, right? So this is where you need to attack a little bit. And you could see some A.J. Terrell containing Garrett Wilson downfield. So Tim Boyle's hopefully is smart enough. This is actually Tim Boyle's like a sneaky, really deep DFS play this week. So if you're really looking for some cheap pointage and you want to load up on everyone else, do stars everywhere else and put a scrub in at quarterback, watch out. You could have a decent game because he's so cheap in DFS. So I'm going to say that. But a big reason I do like him, and I also like Conklin in DFS, is because of this matchup. I think the Falcons, I'm going to be fully transparent here. I picked the Jets to win this game. I don't trust the Falcons on the road, and this is why I'm going to invest a little bit more in the Jets this week.
Yeah, I don't think either is going to be good, Tyler Conklin or Kyle Pitts, but Tyler Conklin at least has a nice matchup. And really, the Jets, they don't have to worry about anyone else but Drake London. So their next worry is going to be Kyle Pitts, and we know how good their secondary is. I'm not playing that game.
Kyle Pitts is a wide receiver, so keep that in mind. And technically,
exactly.
So like if they shut him down, I mean, I'm not saying play Jonnu Smith, but that's how it goes this week. He had 0 targets last week. So Jonnu's off the radar, but still that didn't help Kyle Pitts. So if that can't help him, I don't know what will, except a new quarterback and a new offensive play caller. So maybe we'll have to wait till 2024 to then finally write off Kyle Pitts as a bust. So we'll see how that plays out. But Yeah, tight end, you're going to have to dig deeper this week, but it's actually not as bad as you think, given some of the really good matchups for some of those guys. Even Jake Ferguson tonight, Sam Laporta. There's a lot of actually some decent tight ends with those big names off this week. So, Michelle, it was a good look here, wide receiver tight end. I like the debates here that we're having at the certain positions with certain guys this week. It's been a lot of fun, and it'll be fun as we close the show tomorrow as well. We'll do our price picks of the week. We'll look at some really deep sleepers you can play, some shots that we want to take at our flex spots. So that's some good stuff there. We go back and forth with all kinds of players there as well for you to close the week for Locked On Fantasy Football and this wide receiver tight end ranking show on a Thursday. This has been Vinnie Iyer.
And I'm Michelle Magdziuk. Bye, y'all.